He was Canada's first ever parliamentary budget officer, appointed by Stephen Harper to provide an extra set of eyes on the government's planned expenditures. But if the Prime Minister thought the PBO was going to be a rubber stamp, he was sorely mistaken. Kevin Page was thorough, tough, and worst of all for the Conservative government, he was far more accurate on the numbers than they were, which did cause Harper numerous political headaches. The former PBO has chronicled it all in a book called Unaccountable: Truth and Lies on Parliament Hill. And Kevin Page joins us now here in studio. It's great to see you again.
Good to be here.
Thanks for coming back. Let's just start with this. What did you understand the mission of the Parliamentary Budget Office to be when you got the job?
Well, I think that the mission flows from the Act of Parliament, which kind of flows from the Accountability Act, which is to provide information to parliamentarians so that they, on financial issues, can hold the executive to account. And in the Act of Parliament, it talks about the economy, it talks about nation's finances and costing.
Let's remind everybody, this was a campaign promise made by then opposition leader Stephen Harper to implement when he took over, and that's exactly what he did, right?
Right, and I think, on the accountability issue, we heard a lot of it in 2005-06. We're not hearing too much of it, certainly from the Conservative Party in 2015.
You say in the book that the government consistently tried to discredit people who opposed what you or other critics did. Why do you think they did that?
Well, I think in part is their management style of trying to control messaging and to, I think, to strengthen their brand as being good economic and fiscal managers. And if, we were a financial team, a team that did economic and fiscal projections. To the extent that we undermined that message, it was disconcerting for them.
But it wasn't just them. I talked to opposition MPs who also thought you were too big for your britches. And even they were critical that you had somehow gone beyond your mandate. Is that accurate?
Well, actually, the issue of going beyond the mandate became an issue in 2012 where, we actually went to federal court to see whether or not we were within or without a mandate. But I think the issue, it's part of a change, Stephen. I think we came out, we started producing reports on cost of wars and Aboriginal infrastructure, fighter planes. I think information that MPs had not seen before, but the kind of information we would give the Prime Minister and Finance Minister, but now we're making it available to everybody, to Stephen Paikin, and there's a change element to that.
Here's an excerpt, rather, from the book. It is a shame, you write, that Prime Minister Harper has not sought more veteran public servants, such as Mr. Derek Burney, who was Brian Mulrooney's Chief of Staff, to help him run his PMO, which I think reflects poor judgment on the part of the Prime Minister. He consistently chooses people willing to nod their heads yes on command, an apparent reality that has cost the Prime Minister in recent times in any number of areas. Tell us what you think the virtue of using the so-called veteran public servant is over people that the Prime Minister clearly knows better and trusts more.
Well, I think I'm somebody that worked in the Privy Council office for 10 years under different, political leadership. And I think Prime Ministers need to have people around them that actually will be supportive. When the messages are delivered, we're going to follow through. But also, I think there's times where they need to get advice that, based on experience, that they may not like to hear. And I think there were moments on economic outlook kind of moments in 2008 when the economy was crashing that we shouldn't be putting out a budget that said no recession, no deficit. Or on fighter planes to know that there were other numbers that are just out there that were much, much bigger on the cost of the F-35, that he just needed to hear it. And I think they moved forward in a way that showed just, for me, a lack of experience. So I think you need a blend. You certainly need young people that provide energy, but I think you need experienced people that have that wisdom of having done it before.
You referenced the fighter jets, and let's pick up on that because the cost of purchasing those new F-35s really put you in the crosshairs with the Prime Minister and his office. You describe that purchase as, quote, manipulation brought to a whole new level, and here's how you describe it in the book. You talked about a moment in which they, the government, collectively could have said, hold it, we got this wrong, we need to make this right. Instead, some civil servants and politicians chose to hide, confuse, obfuscate, and try to deceive the entire country. It was a scene I will never forget, a low point in the recent history of our democracy. Why do you think things unfolded the way they did rather than the way you thought they ought to have?
I think it was clear to me that the military wanted this plane, that they thought it was the best plane. And from a financial person, I think I think you need to take advice. If they think it's the best plane, and then the issue really is how much is it going to cost? How, let's set aside the appropriate amount of money so that we can pay for it. I think the way that issue was handled, that I don't think the Prime Minister ever, my sense is, never got a good briefing. And I'm somebody that had briefed the Prime, as a financial person, I would have provided briefings to the Prime Minister before I took the office. So I think the military, could convince them that, that we can get this price at a much lower cost. And, so as it unfolded, we released a report. We talked about numbers that were much higher than the government's numbers in a press release. A year later, the Auditor General releases a report saying, well, actually, the public servants went to Cabinet with information that's, price tags that were much bigger than what they had released publicly into Parliament. And, I think, and then, even afterwards, where we could have, reset, we could say, okay, let's work on our procurement processes. Let's talk about the same kind of numbers. I think they know they continue to want to obfuscate the issue. And we really, here we are, 2015. This debate is, long in the tooth, and we still haven't made progress on the issue of the fighter plane.
But what is it about either this PM or his PMO that makes you think he'd rather hunker down and go with bad numbers than acknowledge that maybe somebody else was right and reboot?
Well, perhaps it's back to that issue of we're good economic and fiscal managers. We know how to handle the purse strings. And the issue of sticker shock, tell somebody you can get something for half the price and you turn out it's really twice that amount, like you're shocking people. And I think it was the same issue on crime bills where the government said that, we're going to be tough on crime, but they, wouldn't provide any information in budgets or in departmental documents on those costs.
I'm not sure you had a worse relationship with any politician in Ottawa than the one you did with Jim Flaherty, the late finance minister. He attacked you, calling you unbelievable, unreliable, and incredible. Did you ever have a private moment with him? Because, even people on the other side of the house liked him. And they thought, yeah, he's a pit bull in public, but he's really a sweetie pie in private. So did you ever have one of those private moments with him where he might have said to you, I know you're right, and I have to attack you in public, but, we're okay? Anything like that ever happen?
I would have loved to have had that moment. We did have, it's talked in the book, we had one face-to-face meeting where we sat just the way you and I are sitting across from the table in his office. And he was definitely listening. And I felt like it was being kind of sized up. I think the key question in that meeting was, Kevin, why is it so adversarial? It was just said that way in a soft voice. And like you, I heard nothing but great things about Jim Flaherty, the kind of person he was, and had certainly, respect and an appreciation of what it's like to be a finance minister when the bottom falls out of the world economy and you're running these big deficits. I think, did I do a good enough job convincing him it's adversarial only in the context that we're putting out numbers and you're not putting out your own numbers. We tried to explain it. I wanted other meetings, but really, I think it was more, I don't think it was personal, I think it was just political. I think he thought I was, pulling at the rug from underneath his feet politically.
Well, that's what I wonder. You're not a small C conservative. He was. So was it more personal than political?
No, I don't think it was ever personal, really. I think it was purely political. I think all those things that people say about Mr. Flaherty are absolutely true. I think he's a genuinely nice man. But I think political in the sense that, we were providing a counter-narrative to their narrative as being good economic and fiscal managers, and he didn't like it, and he had to defend the party. He's a team player.
So when he called you unbelievable, unreliable, and incredible, why didn't you ever attack back?
Well, I think unbelievable and incredible, as I explained to my wife, is actually not necessarily bad. The unreliable could be a bad part. And I think it was political rhetoric, really. I don't, again, take that personally. And I think the context for that is just the analysis that we've been putting out time and time again when the government wasn't putting out analysis. I think on this issue, it was on the issue when the Prime Minister went to Davos and said old age security program is not sustainable because the number of recipients is going to go up dramatically over the next few decades. And we said, we've been providing this analysis to Parliament and said, well, actually, your fiscal framework is sustainable now after you cut or reduce the escalator of the Canada Health Transfer. So, we felt incumbent to put out that analysis. We were consistently putting it out. They were not putting it out. They were told by the Auditor General to put out an analysis. So what else is he going to say?
Did you ever worry that he was either going to fire you or shut you down because you were so often in conflict with what the government's line of the day was?
I never worried about being fired. There's another story, behind that. But I honestly, I think that I worried about, and I think the team worried about it, was our work of high quality. That was the focus. It was the advice we got from other people around the world. Make sure your work is of high quality. Do your best to communicate it. Was point number two. And point number three was, you got to be tough. So you got to hold your hold the line and, you know, be open, be transparent, and honest.
We'll get to that other story that you just referenced later. Did you ever think of quitting?
I did. Got to a point, a low point for me personally in the summer of 2009. I found myself, this was after a sequence of events starting, after we released 2 reports, we had our budget reduced by 1/3, and I found myself in front of a committee saying, well, you know, I was already hiring people to kind of do reports in 2009, that the budget has to come back. And then in front of a committee where, you know, a joint committee of the Library of Parliament, House and Senate, where they, you know, they gave me a series of recommendations, and one of them was that everything we did had to be confidential. In fact, the way that the MPs would control our work, they would have the power to release it or not release it. And my point always was on the confidentiality, transparency issues. If you did that, I would be looked partisan immediately. You know, politicians would want a high number, a low number, or a narrative that they want, and so our work would never see the light of day. So I remember, I literally, you know, after that report was tabled with those 10 recommendations, I left the office thinking I was quitting and rode my bike home as I typically do. You know, I remember stopping halfway to visit a friend at a hospital and getting a call from Mr. Mulcair, at that time the finance critic, and said, Kevin, I think he knew that I was thinking of quitting. He said, don't quit. A few minutes later, getting a call from Jack Layton. I was taking my lock off my bike. He said, Kevin, you can't quit. You got to keep producing reports. It's too important. Then getting home and saying to my wife, I think I'm going to quit. She says, no, you can't quit. I think she was finally the one I said, no, okay, I have to keep going on. But then the people in the office says, Kevin, we'll find workarounds on the issue of confidentiality. And we did, and we continued to produce a lot of work afterwards.
You're not there anymore, obviously. You have turned it over to the next generation of parliamentary budget officers. How's that office working now that you're not there anymore?
Still a very good team at the office. A lot of people stayed, and, you know, people like Mustafa Scary, just a terrific economist. I think he's the assistant parliamentary budget officer, but I think tends to be the face for the office. There's people that had left, have gone to the Bank of Canada, and have come back. So it's still a pretty good team. They put out a lot of good work.
We don't hear as much about it anymore, I got to say, now that you're not there.
Well, I think, you know, I think the process to replace the parliamentary budget officer was not a good process, so we need to clean that up. I think that's a problem with legislation. A person was hired that didn't have budgetary experience, so he's not as comfortable as, say, Dr. Scary, as Mustafa Scary is in terms of speaking to Canadians and to Parliament.
Since you left, Ontario has set up its own parliamentary budget office for Queen's Park. Did they call you in for advice?
They did. Yeah, you know, when the initiative was being announced, I spoke to the Leader of the Opposition at the time about the initiative, how to set it up. I did appear in front of the committee. I've spoken to the current officer, the Financial Accountability Officer, and I think it's a trend that you see in other parts of the world of trying to strengthen Parliament.
And can you, I mean, they've been up for less than a year. Is it too early to come to any conclusions about how well they're doing?
But I know they've been very busy. They have some big reports coming out. I think I'm really hoping they do very well.
Okay.
I'm a taxpayer in Ontario.
So you care, I understand. I want to circle back to that thing you delicately referenced earlier, and I normally wouldn't bring this stuff up, but you write about it in the book. You're pretty candid about some of the worst tragedies that anybody could befall. And it's not just one. I want to go in order here, actually, in the way you bring them up. You talk candidly about your father, who abused alcohol, and many, many years later, apparently asked for your forgiveness for the negative impact that that alcoholism had on your life. How did you deal with that request for forgiveness?
Well, you never forget it, and I think that the bond that you have with your father, which is there anyways, just gets that much stronger. And it's kind of a positive story. And then I got to watch my father struggle, basically dig a hole for himself, create problems for my family, and particularly my mom, and then deal with the addiction. We had another issue. My sister got sick, had a little baby, and my dad just said, now's the time, my family needs me. And he just unbelievably rose to the occasion, stopped completely drinking. And I watched his whole personality just completely change. Became, a very humorous man, very loving man. And it went from like conversations that I had with my dad, which were not nice, to I couldn't wait to talk to him and just to share stories. And and he would go out of his way to make me laugh. So, to me, it's a positive story. We're human beings, but it's nice to watch that transformation of people. It's
unusual, though, for a parent to ask his child for forgiveness. Did the request take you back at all?
Well, it happened right after my dad's brother, my uncle Ronnie, passed away, and we were in Montreal, and yeah, it's an emotional time. Like he's watching, he's burying his brother, and you know, I was close to hit my uncle, and it just like that kind of moment. And I think my dad just sort of looking back, realizing that life is too important, and you know, we needed this time for openness. We're not like we needed this time to be open, and it was an amazing thing. I wish I was as strong as my dad. In the book, we used that reference. He's a tough bastard, and I never said I'm a tough bastard. But my dad was one of those people who worked in mills. He was shoveling potash in Thunder Bay when he was 65, and but you know, it just transformed his life. I had a beautiful retirement with my mom. It was really nice to see.
Speaking of siblings, your sister Karen, widowed at a young age, and then diagnosed with schizophrenia after that. How did all of that have an impact on your life?
Well, I mean, in a way, when you watch a sister go through something like that, and given the nature of that disease, you ask yourself, like, why is it my sister and why not me? Because my sister was every bit as healthy as I was growing up, and but she had to deal with this, and you know, also like I think I'm very close with my sister. She's a very loving person. She has a beautiful daughter, 2 great grandchildren. And thanks to some great work in the mental health community in Thunder Bay, has a a good life. So, but yeah, I think you look back and you see the randomness of that. Like, why is her? Why not me? But you also see the importance of family and having a good mental health community.
I'm saving the worst for last. I always wondered why you never seemed very ruffled or perturbed by any of the slings and arrows that you had to sustain when you were the parliamentary budget officer. And then I found out you had a child die. Your teenage son was hit by a train and killed. And that, boy, the light just goes on, eh? Once you've gone through that, I guess what people say about you in Ottawa just doesn't matter a damn, does it?
No, it doesn't matter. Other things become much more important. I mean, as a parent, you cannot forgive yourself. I think I still deal consciously and subconsciously with a lot of guilt. I just wish I could have helped Tyler. He had some issues with alcohol and drugs. I thought we were helping him. You know, he had this one slip up, and again, in that randomness of life, he had to pay this ultimate price for. So yeah, I think looking forward, like obviously we were family. We really struggled after the loss of Tyler, and you know, a day doesn't go by where you don't think of that type of the loss. And so when you take on work, and the way you relate to people, it changes. And I don't know if it's more meaningful, but at the end of the in the morning when you have a hard time looking yourself at the mirror, like you just try to think of what is really important about this day. And so yeah, I think it does change. So absolutely, work. Whether you have the right numbers, the bad numbers, whether a Minister of Finance calls you unreliable, or something else is put in a very different context.
Did people in Ottawa know this about your background?
Well, I think my close friends obviously knew, and I was a senior servant, public servant when I was Prime Minister's Assistant Secretary for Macroeconomic Policy when that accident happened. I think there was a lot of support from my colleagues in the public service. The Prime Minister very nicely sent flowers and cards and things.
Which PM?
Prime Minister Harper, absolutely. You should, again, people often say, well, why don't you take this stuff personally? How could I take it personally? I just don't think Minister Flaherty or the Prime Minister Harper, I don't have any ill will towards these people. Again, what we're talking about is, institutions in the direction of the country. But yeah, I think the nature of the work and how you relate to people, it changes after a big loss like that.
Because you wonder whether anybody at some point might have said to themselves, this guy's been to hell and back. Maybe we should cut him some slack and not attack him personally so much. Do you think that occurred to anybody?
No, I didn't, and I actually wouldn't want them to cut me any slack. It's possible that when they decided, let's appoint Kevin in that position of parliamentary budget officer, maybe, they thought that, Privy Council office, to be honest, a very busy place, and people don't often think of public service working 6-7 days a week, long hours, but all those people in those buildings, they do. And because you have to stay on top of events, and so it's possible that the Prime Minister and his office, when they looked at that list of names, that said, well, let's give Kevin a break. He's we know what he's about, and he needs some help, and maybe he'll help us, in the position of being parliamentary budget officer.
There's a more nefarious interpretation to that, of course, which is this guy's been through a lot of tragedy, and he won't have the strength to fight us when push comes to shove. Did that interpretation occur to you?
No, not really. I mean, it could be the right interpretation. It didn't really occur to me. Again, I was fortunate able to kind of work with some amazing people, and they came, I think, all for the right reasons. When
Stephen Harper gave you the job, did he ever have a meeting with you during which time he told you, here's why I'm hiring you?
No, it wasn't like that. There were definitely meetings with some of his colleagues in the Prime Minister's office who I think were actually quite supportive. Again, when I was appointed March 2008, the economy was growing, we were sitting on surpluses. There was no need to be not transparent, and the government was cutting taxes. It was, those were like good times. I think, events changed for the government. We found ourselves in a world recession. The government was worried about sticker shock on big issues, and so then that whole hiding of costs became a big issue, and I was the parliamentary budget officer.
You spoke to him since you left?
The Prime Minister, no.
Anybody else up there you spoke to since you left?
Oh, lots of contact, almost daily contact with people that would have been in the Prime Minister's office. Still, I think there's still, I hope anyways that there's a relationship of respect. I think they respect the work that we were doing.
Well, that's what I'm wondering. Is it a relationship of respect, or do they hate you?
I hope they respect the work.
They could do both, actually. They could respect the work and hate you at the same time.
Yeah, I don't think...
Hate's too strong, but you know what I'm saying.
I don't
think
think
their life crazy for a while.
I don't think there's a lot of hate. Just I've had the opportunity to be in offices of of leaders and cabinet ministers. It's more a political game. I don't see hate. But there's a lot on the line for these people, like in these elections and the debates, which you've been part of. That their political futures are at stake. They want power, and in a sense, that's if you're an accountability officer, if you're the parliamentary budget officer, and you're providing information to Parliament to hold somebody accountable, you're in the middle of that. So you're in the crossfire. You
ever think of running for office?
No.
Never once?
No, don't think. I love my job at the University of Ottawa. I'm with students. We're trying to build things there. I think doing this book was an amazing opportunity. I got to write it with my good friend Vern Stenlin from Thunder Bay, who can approach these issues the same way I approach them from a similar background. So I'm very happy with my life.
Vern is a trash-talking character, isn't he?
He's a former hockey player. I was with him, Vern, in Thunder Bay. He was awarded, he was inducted into the Hall of Fame. Bobby Orr, shows up for his unannounced for this induction. So, Vern is a man with a lot of gravitas, for sure.
I'm very disappointed in myself that I just mentioned him, because his ego is going to go through the roof now.
Perhaps.
Oh well.
Yeah.
Let's, in our remaining moments here, just look forward. One last excerpt from the book, Unaccountable. Real debate with analysis on Parliament Hill is virtually dead, you write. Successive Liberal and Conservative governments have made this happen, while the vast majority of the public service have silently stood by and watched. Sadly, I sense that many Canadians, civil servants included, have settled into a place of indifference. We are disconnected from our Parliament. We have lost trust in our political leaders and public servants. We need to end our indifference. Okay, what's it going to take for that to happen?
Well, unfortunately, I think it is we're going to need new political leadership and a new culture in Ottawa at the public service as well. That, I think if we're going to tackle these big issues that, we all hope these debates would talk about how are we going to make that transformation to a knowledge-based society, how are we going to deal with those income disparities that come with a knowledge-based society, how are we going to restructure our healthcare system, how are we going to reduce our carbon footprint, how do we change our reputation in the world right now, open up relationships with China and India, et cetera. We're going to need, and how do we fix our institutions, fix the Senate, fix how we appropriate money in the House of Commons. All these things are going to require a very different type of leadership, not top-down control, but very open, very transparent, very looking for help, working with other people collaboratively. Because you can't solve any of those big issues. You can't change the healthcare system without working with somebody else. So it has to change. So bureaucrats are going to have to change the way they work. They're going to have to be much more forward-thinking. And I think political leaders are going to have to be very different. And, I mean, hopefully after these debates where there's this confrontation, that people will kind of say, okay, we need to work across lines, because across these platforms, you could see people want to move forward on Aboriginal issues. You could see this, they want to talk about long-term care, pharmaceutical care. They want to, they want to follow up on some of Elizabeth May's ideas in terms of reducing our carbon footprint. So these are like things we just need to come together in a different way. But the public service has to be part of that.
That which you've just described could take 5 or 10 years.
That's okay.
To clear the decks and get a new cast of characters in there, take a long time. We got that much time?
Well, I think I think to get boots, those feet on the ground, and so that we're not spinning wheels, it could take a bit of time. But with change of leadership, you could start announcing, changes, opening up dialogues with premiers, getting public servants to think about these big-term issues, launching royal commissions, so that we can start making decisions on these issues a few years down the road. So yeah, but I think it's better to send those signals early, and then we can get work to early. And I think things can happen faster than people think. I think people are surprised that PBO can put out work on costing wars, and in doing economic projections and analysis in a very different way within 6 months. Just a handful of people, really, in a very small budget. So we can make big progress.
The name of the book is Unaccountable: Truth and Lies on Parliament Hill. Kevin Page, you saw your share of both. It's a great read, and we thank you for coming into TVO tonight to talk about it.
Thank you so much.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.